Good afternoon, buenas tardes, boa tarde, salut. My name is Gabriela Noles Cotito, she, her pronouns. I am currently in the second year of the Africana Studies PhD program, and I have the honor of introducing this amazing event. Before getting started, we, the 8th Africana Studies Graduate Colloquium Organizing Committee, would like to take a moment to acknowledge the horrendous acts of white supremacist violence that occurred yesterday at several massage parlors in Atlanta, Georgia. These murders are a harrowing reminder of the racially sexualized and gender violences that Asian, Pacific Islanders, and Asian American women endure across the globe. This targeted, coordinated attack is a continuation of Western imperialism and white settler colonialism. And it is to this end that we are including this note of solidarity to open the graduate colloquium. We extend our condolences to the families that have lost loved ones and hope that the souls of the deceased may find their way to the light. We offer our solidarity not only because our situation as Black folk is connected to that of other racialized, marginalized people, but out of a human concern for life and living that is too often cut short by white supremacist terror. The depth of our pain, the struggle for freedom, the practice of resistance, and the exercise of joy unite us in moments like this. Ashe to them and to all of you. The Africana Studies Graduate Student Colloquium at the University of Pennsylvania is an event planned by the PhD students in Africana Studies with the support of the administrative champions and professors of our departments, to whom we are grateful. This event has been running since 2013 as an opportunity for the Africana Studies Department's doctoral students to engage with leading scholars around central debates and questions in the field of Africana Studies. In this sense, previous topics have been Africana Studies and Transdisciplinarities, Questions in Methods and Discourses in 2014, Allies, Archives, and Activism in the Academy in 2015, and Subversive Voices, the Black Body Across the African Diaspora in 2016. The organizing committee for this endeavor are Bonnie Maldonado, she, her pronouns, first-year PhD student in Africana Studies, Joshua Reason, they, them pronouns, first-year PhD student in Africana Studies, Daniel Morales Armstrong, he, his pronouns, third-year PhD student in the joint program of Africana Studies and History, and myself. For this year colloquium, in its 8th virtual and pandemic edition, we took into consideration many factors: current socio-political contexts, locally and internationally, the challenges and clarity that the pandemic has brought us, and the possibilities and limitations that manifest through ongoing practices in collective struggle and liberation. In choosing this year's topic, Routes to Freedom, Beyond Elsewhere-ism and the Academy, we selected a theme that allows us, PhD students, scholars, and participants at large, to engage in a conversation that touches base on Black joy in the wake of disaster, so much needed in this past year, permitting us to reimagine Black temporalities and spatialities, mapping the future of Black studies while centering as well as challenging the elsewheres and the dichotomies usually explored in the field. This is because our department, Africana Studies at Penn, is marked not only by its interdisciplinarity, but also by a cross-regional approach that includes North America, Latin American, the Caribbean, Africa, and the Middle East. Thus, we all in the Africana Studies family are committed to a cooperative and global approach that brings fresh perspectives to the constantly changing articulation of what Black studies is. As for the format of today's session, we will introduce our amazing panelists who will answer one general question. After this, we will ask questions about their work that we expect can generate conversations amongst them. We will conclude with a Q&A of 30 minutes and 5 more minutes for closing remarks. On behalf of the 8th Africana Studies Graduate Colloquium organizing team, it is my duty to extend our gratitude first to our ancestors, the ones we know and the unknown and silenced ones. We as junior scholars stand on their shoulders and embody their wildest dreams. Thank you also to the amazing Miss Carol Davis, Professor Williams and Professor Casamayor for their advice, as well as to Professor Hanchard and Professor Beavers for their support. A special shout out is due to Sean Fields, the Africana Studies Family Technology and Design Wizard, to the ASL interpreters, Charity and Megan, and Spanish interpreters, Dustin and Maria. Thank you for helping us make this conversation accessible in other languages, amplifying the reach of this important conversation. And finally, thank you to the public for attending this colloquium and to those who will join this broadcast later or through other channels. Before passing the Zoom mic to Daniel, I would like to touch base with you all on some recommendations for the best enjoyment of this event. We know that we like to exercise our reactions through physical expressions. We ask you to engage with your comments and reactions through the chat function and offer your questions within the Q&A function. It should be down here. These questions can be in Spanish, English, and/or Portuguese. Also, we are happy to offer you live transcriptions, ASL interpretation, and Spanish translation through the Zoom channel function. A quick and fast and last note in Spanish for setting language interpretation purposes. Si desea acceder a la interpretación en español, presione el botón traducir debajo mío a la derecha y dele clic a la opción español. This event also have American Sign Language interpretation. If you need it, please make sure to pin Miss Charity Johnson and Miss Megan Toomey Gallery to your Zoom grid. They are our dear ASL interpreters. Thank you all again. And let me introduce at this time, Daniel Morales Armstrong, third year PhD student in the African Studies and History departments.
Thank you, Gabby, and good afternoon, folks. I'm Daniel Morales Armstrong, and my pronouns are he, him. I have the distinct honor of introducing our speakers today. They are a panel of amazing Black women representing different places, professions, and lived experiences, several of whom I have had the pleasure of knowing or having worked with, all of whose work is valuable and connected to the broader goals in which we are all here engaged. Brief introductions for our panelists today are as follows. Dr. Marta Moreno Vega is a scholar, activist, curator, and founder of the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute in Harlem and Corredor Afro in Loíza, Puerto Rico. Her work focuses on Afro-diasporic women, spirituality, and recording our own histories. Dr. Moreno Vega's years of contributions to Black communities span the scholarly, literary, community organizing, and museum worlds. Her When the Spirits Dance Mambo memoir is a personal favorite of mine, and the spaces she has crafted feel like home for many of us in New York City and the Caribbean. Dominique Day is the chair of the United Nations Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent. She is a human rights attorney and is the founder and executive director of the Daylight Collective, which aims to promote justice across borders, boundaries, and sectors. She is a fellow at Penn's Perry World House and serves as an insightful contributor to conversations and initiatives in and beyond Perry. Harris Machado is a documentarian, educator, and co-founder of Afro-Latinx Travel. She teaches a popular Black Latin American history series, is a facilitator of an anti-Blackness in the Latina community virtual workshop, and co-hosts the Radio Caña Negra podcast. I've had the pleasure of collaborating with Dash on study abroad programming for New York City high school students, and her curated itineraries have offered us invaluable learning experiences in community with folks across the African diaspora. Thank you all for your many contributions and for making the time to be in community with us. To say that we are excited to host you all today is an understatement. And we hope that this virtual space is one in which we can both hear your stories and in which you can create your own exchanges. That said, I'll start off with our first and broadest question before passing it over to my colleague Josh, who will dive into specific questions for our panelists. To our esteemed guests, Thinking of our colloquium title and conceptual theme, what are the roots or routes that have shaped your own life and work? And this can touch on the broadly construed arenas of space, community, schooling, land, identity, calling, lo que sea. Again, we'll go in order that the panelists were introduced. Dr. Marta Moreno Vega, Dominique, and Harris Machado.
Do you hear me? Buenas tardes. I don't know what's happening. Is it on?
Yes, we hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, good afternoon. Buenas tardes. And it's an honor to be with the panel, with the other panelists. And thank you for having me be part of this gathering. I think that addressing the title, right? One has to look at past, present, and what we envision or I envision for the future. I come from parents born in Puerto Rico of African descent, and knowing they were African and teaching their children that they were of African descent as well as Puerto Rican. And also come from a family that believed in spirituality, espiritismo, right, which is ancestor worship. And I'm really looking through our lives, through the guidance of ancestors, also through our Blackness, and also through the traditions that we learned in New York City, because I was born in New York City's El Barrio, looking at our experience through the lenses of being Puerto Rican and creating space in East Harlem. So that with that grounding, right, most of my work has been focused on researching, on identity politics, if you will, and not politics, party politics, but public policy, and understanding what our lives has been in the past and still is in the present, and how we change inequity into the future. So that necessitates, right, the label of activism, although I think that all of us are activists, because if you are not concerned with how your children are living, how your family is living, then you're living in another planet, right? So that my parents were very clear that they wanted their children to get an education, that they wanted their children to be treated fairly. So my mother was an activist in the school system, although she didn't recognize that she was an activist, to assure that her children were treated with dignity and with respect. The work that I have done, and I have to tweak some of what was said, has been focused on African diaspora studies. And what do I mean by that? It means that I have been looking globally at the experience we have as an African descendant people. And in that process, looking at communities from a global and local lens. One of the activities I did in developing the Caribbean Cultural Center was having international conferences, one in Ife, Nigeria, another in Brazil, another in Trinidad, Haiti, Cuba, as well as, of course, the United States and in Puerto Rico. And the importance of that is because we have to understand that we are linked in very intentional ways, because our experience, although different ethnic groups came into the Americas, has been one of reinventing, restructuring, and redefining and recreating who we are as a people. And in that process, maintaining those belief systems and those traditions and those cultural indicators that define us as a people. And the reality is, because enslavement ended yesterday, right? And we often forget because we get into books and we get into scholarship, and we forget that enslavement actually ended yesterday. And if you're of my mind, it really didn't end, because we're still fighting for our voting rights. We're still fighting for dignity. We're still fighting for racial and cultural rights. So that when we understand that enslavement in Brazil ended in 1888, right, in Puerto Rico, 1873, Cuba, 1880, you know, it was yesterday. It was yesterday. And what that means is that our people, because the amount of our people that were forcibly brought came in mass, these traditions existed and continue to exist and continue to develop the fabric of who we are. And most of my work has been looking at that fabric that has been sustained and retained and has resisted white supremacy, and has insisted upon seeing us through the lens, an aesthetic lens, a cultural lens, a racial lens that centers us. And that is why the building of institutions for me is critical. I understand we have to go through universities, and I went through universities, right? Got my doctorate and did all of that. But I understood that it was a piece of paper that just gave me license, right? To develop more information, look at scholarship, get a scholarship so that I can do the studies I did throughout the world. And I think that one of the things that we have to understand is that if we're in this work, we're working both locally and globally, because we're knitting together what has been tossed into the diaspora. And the studies are still in the happening, they're still in the becoming. And so that the books you're reading are still deficient. The studies that you're reading are still deficient, because you are part of the creation of the information and the documentation and the finding of information that has been hidden and put in invisible forms, so that we have to still search for them. So that the work of, at least I think my work has been developing my own educational processes and developing institutions that allow others to learn about our experience and research our experience and look at our experiences. So that right now I'm in Puerto Rico developing 2 projects. One being the Creative Justice Initiative, which is looking at policy, looking at issues and gathering data on the cultural institutions that we have in the nation, and hopefully into the diaspora. And a project that we call Corredor Afro, and we call it sort of dealing with this topic, right? How do we connect the pieces that have been distributed throughout not only Puerto Rico, but throughout the globe? So the idea of Corredor Afro, which I created in partnership with Maricruz Rivera Clemente, who also developed a project here called COPI, Corporación Piñones Integra, which is environmental justice, cultural justice, racial justice focus. We partnered, right, as coming out of the diaspora in New York, and she grounded in Piñones, a historically Black community developed by Maroons and runaway enslaved peoples. We have developed an organization or a project in Piñones that deals with the freedom to research, the freedom to look, the freedom to think, right? Because ultimately, many of us have been taught within a system that's white supremacist, and we don't know the other. And we have to create that other space, right? And we have to create that other thinking, that way of researching that gives us the freedom to find truth, right? And in finding truth, find justice. So I don't know if you want to show the slides right now, so I can walk you through the slides quickly. Is that now, or do we do that later? Someone help?
You can do it now if you'd like.
Yeah, let's do it now. Then let's start with creative justice. To be clear, creative justice is an institution. This is Corredor Afro that we're looking at. So let's start there. This is an institution that Maricruz Rivera Clemente and I have developed in the Maroon community of Piñones in Loíza, which is primarily an African descendant community in Puerto Rico. My dad was born here, and we learned about Loíza in our growth and in our youth, but never having been to the island until I was 19, right? It was sort of a fairy tale kind of story he was saying. So this institution is about showcasing the knowledge, the intelligence of African descendants in Puerto Rico and in the globe. This first exhibition called Negro, Negra, Negrex is curated by Celso González, and it brings together young artists, established artists to imagine, right, and present their narrative in terms of what the African diaspora and what the issues facing us are. So this is the work of Celso González that you're looking at now. And this is the institution, the monument that we're building. And I don't like the word monument, but it is a monument to us, to the African diaspora, as the Caribbean culture is in New York. This is in Piñones. And you see Schomburg is the mosaic that Celso developed. And the building for us represents a space where people could come and think, create, and invent. And I think that the establishment of our universities becomes critical, and our spaces as educational spaces is critical, because within academia, we're still getting a framework that is supremacist in its look and in its formation. And it's important to get out of the university and look broader and examine broader, because as I said before, the educational material that's available is still wanting. And our scholars, including myself, are doing important investigations, but we're still in the process of pulling together our experience as a people. So you can continue. This is Celso, who did the mural, Maricruz, who is the co-founder, and myself. You can continue. This is the exhibition that's on now through the 31st. This is the work of Nancy Miranda. And this is a poster of a conversation we had with some of the artists that were part of the exhibition. And the idea of the conversation is, as we're doing now, right, to interweave our knowledge, our intelligence, and frame, right, an aesthetic that is grounded in our principles, our criteria, our vision, our beliefs, not one that's Eurocentric, right? And you're trying to fit into it, because you will never fit into it, because it's not made for you by you. So the idea, right, is to sort of Marcus Garvey framework to create that which we want from the framework and the aesthetic and the criteria that reflects who we are. Next, if you will. This is a Creative Justice Initiative. And I think that the work that I have done in the past 40 odd years, maybe going into 50 years, has been looking at the local and looking at international. Because we understand, right, following the principles of Martin Luther King and Malcolm, that we need to look at the global reality so that we understand the local reality. And we have to understand the local reality so we understand the international reality. And wherever injustice is, it affects us. And on this next series, and this is part of a series that we did looking at the Black movement coming out of the civil rights movement into the present, right? Movement for Black Lives Matter. Because we have to understand that there is a continuum and a thread of oppression, right? There's white supremacy has a way of reinventing itself to always remain in power. And if we don't understand that, and if we don't analyze it, we think that one event, right, destructures or explodes that, and it doesn't. So that we have to be very mindful of how it reconfigures itself so that we can continue resistance and we can continue chipping away at it so that our children and our younger people going forward and ourselves will have a better life. So that this panel is looking at the cross-cultural coming together of movements of the 70s. And this was put together by Neida Martinez and others, right? And the idea is to have people from the Patriot Movement, from the Young Lords Party, from the Black Panther Party, talking about their experience, as well as having younger organizers and activists talking about how they're approaching activism now and the destruction of white supremacy. So that this has been a 3-month series going forward. And this section really focuses on helping people envision themselves as activists, right? To understand what is affecting their experience and what to do about it. So this is coming up next week. I don't know if there's another slide. I think that's it. So I think that that gives you a sense of the work that I have been doing. And just to be clear, Corredor Afro is a project, and Creative Justice Initiative is an incorporated 501c3, as is the organization that is headed by Marie Guru, is a 501c3. So thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing, Dr. Moreno Vega. I'd like to pass it on to Dominique now.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank the organizers also, because I feel like I'm in a very hallowed presence right now. My co-panelists, I am not an artist. I am not a creator in that way. And so to sort of sit on a panel with you is such an honor. And I really appreciate the words I've just heard and the words I'm about to hear. And also just sort of to be in conversation and in community with you here today. So I'm a lawyer. I sit as the chair of the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent. I work on human rights law and civil rights law. I look at internationally how people of African descent experience our human rights, how we can protect them and promote them. But what I see it, the way I define this, is more how we can uplift the stories of us in ways that highlight the connections between us, and also in ways that really do justice to the local manifestations of both white supremacy and anti-Black racism, understanding that each of these harkens back to a historical moment in time where we used race as a construct to create opportunities for profit, to create opportunities for a particular group of people. So when you look at colonialism, when you look at the trade and trafficking in enslaved Africans, we start, right? We start from a space of understanding the construction of whiteness and the construction of Blackness as what might be called a business necessity. When I talk to lawyers, I use that word specifically because that is the term that is used by courts, including our Supreme Courts, for hundreds of years to justify, rationalize, and ignore atrocity. So I don't come to you as an artist, but I come to you with deep respect for that, because I think when we talk about the roots and the routes that that inform our work, for me, a lot of the way I define my identity and my day-to-day is being in struggle, right? Being a product of Black struggle and being, I hope, a contributor to it in the ways that I can. And what that looks like, right, is living inside of this recognition that freedom is ours and that we have to demand it in all of our spaces. That means living inside of the knowledge that struggle isn't always comfortable, especially for our audiences. And let me tell you this, a secret you don't know when you go into racial justice work is that you spend a lot of time talking to white people who do not believe that they are contributors to systemic racism. You spend a lot of time talking to people who struggle to see, acknowledge, or credit the racialized nature, the racial bias, and the racism of their own words. And that space, right, that is for me what it means to be in struggle, sort of continuing to engage in some of these spaces with the recognition that they may not be dismantling so much as preparing the groundwork for someone who comes behind, right? But I really relate to what we've heard already, because I think the biggest recognition of my both education and my professional life, I went to many fancy schools as a young adult. I'm a lawyer, I'm not a PhD. And then I practiced law, and I've practiced in my field for, I guess, 21 years now. So there's a good chunk of time I've been doing this. And, you know, what became very clear to me early on, and I think that's something that's very clear to a lot of us, is that we do need to build a different framework, right? In order to do the work, in order to do the work we want to do in fields that have often been defined very carefully to minimize the relevance of our lived experience, to minimize the importance of interdisciplinary and cross-cultural conversations, right? In these fields that have been fragmented and chopped up, the same ways that they have fragmented and chopped up our identities, I have found that it's important to build a different framework, to not be defined by the norms and the frameworks and the practices that seek to erase us, the norms that seek to control us, and the norms that seek to define us. And you know, there isn't a plan for that. That's something we do. That's something we do. For me, by taking every tool I've been given. For me, my education was filled with little nuggets that helped me see what could be, even in the absence, and I agree, in the absence of the scholarship on us. More of it is coming now, which is fantastic. But you know, when I was in school, right, we didn't have PhDs studying and showing us how emergency room doctors default to anti-Black bias when things are overloaded. We didn't have research showing us that doctors credited pain differently when it came from a Black body, credited claims of pain differently. And so absent this, right, we had to renegotiate identity inside of our own belief, knowledge, and experiences of community. And I think that's a privilege that I've had to negotiate sort of in my own work. And, you know, to that end, I often talk about the importance of people like Audre Lorde, right, who say the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, and how inspiring those words have been for generations of us as we think about how we show up, how we position ourselves in our careers, in our lives, in moments like this where there may be opportunity, how we understand that the systems that we work within, the systems that have educated us, the systems that we often operate within professionally, may not have the capacity or the interest to dismantle systemic racism, to confront white supremacy, and how the joy and the creativity and the imagination of the artists may be the route for us to get there. There's a secret I often, there's a secret I've never actually said this before, and maybe it's not that big a deal to you guys. But for me, when I'm writing a legal brief, when I'm writing a UN paper, when I'm preparing for a presentation, particularly if it's around something new, the first thing I do is I find a piece of art that centers Black agency. These days, it's usually something on television. It's a work that is available to me in my own living room that centers us as agents, as filled with joy, as filled with collective resistance, that reimagines possibilities, that reimagines who we are and how we can be. And I watch it to decolonize my mind. I watch it to ensure that the norms, that the practices, that the expectations that have been fed into me through my education, through the spaces where I operate, do not define the possibilities for my clients or for my work with people of African descent all over the world. And I think we all have tricks on how to do that. We all have tricks on what it is to actually free your mind of the thing that would have you replicate the very injustices you're working to eliminate. And this is why I say it's such an honor for me to sit on this panel, because it's the artists who give me the most tools and the most information that helps me renegotiate expectations, that helps me lean into rather than shying away from difficult conversations and difficult topics. And it's the artists who help me try to play a role as a translator. For my UN work, we spent a lot of time traveling and talking to people in their homes, in countries where a lot of times people of African descent have been invisibilized by the government, by policy, by the public discourse, and really helping people to see that the burdens that they carry also implicate their human rights, also implicate their access and entitlement to public goods, public services, public accommodations. And that translator role I play starts, right, with this reimagining of who we can be and how our lives can be, that is led by artists, that is led by creative folk. And you know, these reimaginings, right? I come in a lot of times and I offer, here's the framework of your law, here's the framework of international law, here's the framework of human rights. But there is nothing that I will ever say that trumps the importance of the reimaginings of people in their local spaces, of the importance of linking individual and community experiences to how we interpret and understand both what the laws are, what the policies are, and also whether they are real, whether they are working, whether they are actually being used. And like these sort of local reimaginings, local manifestations of joy, of resilience, of pain, the art that shows it to us, the art that shows that to us. It's local, it's extraordinary, and it creates these stories. And in my work, these stories contain remarkable similarities place to place to place. And that is the space that I try to inhabit when I think about the route forward and when I think about the roots of my own commitments and my own heart in this space. So maybe I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to pass it over now to Harris Machado, and we will start the PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you, Daniel. And shout out to Daniel. Daniel's been a long time friend of mine from the time he went to see the screening of my docuseries like 10 years ago in the Bronx. So,
in a minute.
So it's great to be in community with him, great to be on this amazing panel with Doctora Moreno, with Dominique Day. Doctora Moreno, as you were talking about the frameworks of building new frameworks for us, or for ourselves rather, it always reminds me of the shampoo and conditioner bottles, or rather the conditioner bottle that it always said use a dime-sized amount of conditioner. And I remember from when I was very young being like, a dime-sized amount conditioner is not gonna work for my hair. So you a lie. I was already making those connections as a small child, because a dime-sized amount of nothing would suffice for my hair. And so I feel really honored and lucky to be in conversation with Dr. Moreno, with Dominique Day, and to basically share our lived experiences. I have a slideshow to guide me because I am very long-winded at times, so the slides will guide how I'm talking. I love this image. It's an image taken in Colombia, Black Power, and these are the type of images that I love to see. And the slideshow has because my I guess niche is audio and visual and images and visual. And I chose images that tell my story, essentially. I am what people would call a comebacker. I'm joining the panel from Panama City, Panama. My mother left Panama pregnant with me. And before she left Panama, while my grandmother was getting the papers ready for her to go, she won the lottery, the local lottery that everybody plays. They buy the boletos, the tickets every day religiously. My grandmother still buys those tickets, but she won in the late 80s when my mother was pregnant, and that allowed her to get the paperwork faster so that my mother could immigrate to the States. And the next slide is a little snippet from my documentary series that I did 10 years ago. It'll be the 10-year anniversary this year. And Doctora Moreno was one of the first people that I interviewed. And this is just a 27-second clip of what the documentary series encompasses.
In general, people do not realize the blackness of Argentina, the blackness of Peru, the blackness of Bolivia, the blackness of Ecuador, the blackness of Venezuela, the blackness of Panama. People do not realize how black Latin America is. People in America, in the US, do not know that there are 150 million Afro-Latinos, but Latinos do not know that either.
So that little snippet, which brings me to the next slide, is in
general.
I was going to say the idea, but the reality of Black normativity. Black normativity was and continues to be my lived experiences, my ancestral experiences, my ancestral knowledge, my lived knowledge. Here I have literally a map of where I'm located in Panama. Underneath is a picture of my grandfather that my grandmother sent me a couple weeks ago on WhatsApp. She's 81 on WhatsApp, sending me memes and everything. And she's like, oh, who is that? Who's that handsome man? I'm like, Vin. That my grandfather's name was Alvin. And my family's from La Tacita de Oro, or the gold cup. That's what Colón was known as in its glory days. There's a picture of Colón at the bottom there. On the right is a picture of my mother. She took the selfie, my sister, my grandmother in the middle, and that's me on my wedding day in Cuba. And at the top is a picture of me in San Felipe in Panama. I stopped myself from saying Casco Viejo because that is the gentrified name of that location, which is a Black location in Panama City. And locals call it San Felipe. And so to honor that, I had to correct myself and say San Felipe. In the next slide is more images of, again, my Black normativity. There's a meme that has been going around for a couple years, and it's hashtag Black excellence. And I'm like, hashtag Black regularness, because Black excellence is great. And that's always gonna be there. We're always gonna do it. But I'm also about Black regularness. You know, there's the struggle, there's pain, there's all of these connected solidarity efforts ongoing for generations and centuries. And there's also me going on a walk in the morning and taking a video of a Black bird taking a bath on the sidewalk. There's also my friend who will say, oh, did you see this, this event that happened? I'm like, girl, no, but my plant delivery just arrived. And so I'm repotting these plants. And so I have a picture of a really good friend of mine, Lamar, in the Wakanda shirt. This is taken in a community called Curundú, Panama, a Black community. And she's one of my best friends. And her mom was the first Miss Panama that was unambiguously Black. Ms. Gloria Caramanites, who has become like a family member to me. her family has become like a second family to me. And in talking about wisdom, ancestral wisdom, and soaking up the wisdom that her mom shares with me about how her experience as the first Miss Panama that was unambiguously Black, everyone heads exploded during that time. And I'm sure you can fill in the blanks on why. The picture on the left side was taken in San Basilio de Palenque, which is a maroon town in Colombia that I've been to many times. And we do trips there with my organization, Afro-Latino Travel. And then on the right is my husband in Cuba just getting a haircut at a barbershop. And I thought it was a cool picture, so I took it. The next slide are historical figures and people, and not just figures. As was mentioned, these are people. These are real life people. Egun, our dead. You have at the top left Afro-Mexican children. The top right, an Afro-Peruvian incense burner. At the bottom, the Panamanian Olympic team that fought to get to the Olympics, that Panama did not want them to get to the Olympics. And the crazy part, or rather the white pathological part, is that most of Panama's medals in the Olympics were brought by Black people from the province that my family is from, Colón. The next slide are two women that inspire me, Carolina de Jesus and Benedita da Silva, two Brazilian women that when I read Carolina's book, I basically carried it around like a Bible. In the same way that when I read Doctora Moreno's book, Altar of My Soul, I carried that around like a Bible. And even the comparison it's still steeped in white pathology, but it was a guide for me. And the t-shirt, Respect Black Women. I'm inspired by people that came before me and are still going. I often say that I'm a baby in this work. I'm an embryo. I'm a fetus. I'm a zygote. What's the smallest, right? And in always remembering people that came before me and continue on the work. In the next slide is a quote that, and Daniel mentioned that I do in Black Latin American history classes with my colleague, Javier Wallace, a fellow Panamanian. And the class, when we do the class, we get a lot of people who have PhDs and who say to us, this is the first time I'm engaging with material like this in all of my 8 years of higher education. And on one hand, that to me is psychotic. On the other hand, this again speaks to what Dr. Moreno said about building those educational materials and what Dominique Day said about the frameworks and how we're creating, constructing frameworks that fit for us. And in the next slide, there's a picture here that I sent to my or rather I showed it to my grandma. This picture on the right of the man standing with his hands on his waist. And he looks so proud. And I showed it to my grandma because it's a picture taken in Colón. And she's like, oh, what street? That's down First Street where they used to fish, da-da-da. And that, I love that. I love that I have such a great relationship with my grandmother. She's basically my mother. When I go visit her, I still sleep in her bed. Like there's extra beds in that house. I'm like, I know I'm not sleeping in those beds. So just get used to that. But this man looks so proud. And the thing is that symbolizes my maternal side of my family, where my great-grandfather was one of those workers that built the canal. He built the thing that Panama, or rather Panama's known for a lot of things, but one of the most famous things is the canal. And he was one of those people that brought that to fruition. And I still, now with COVID, I can't see my grandmother as much, but whenever I used to go to her house, she would tell me things like she would oversleep. And so when she got to class, the teacher would lock the door. And so she couldn't go into the class. And so on Sundays, when her father used to visit from the bachelor bachelor barracks on the canal, he used to come and visit. She used to dive under the bed and stay there because he wanted, he wanted to discipline her and he couldn't get her from underneath the bed. And so she stayed there and fell asleep until he left because she knew that he had to go back. And then on the left side, there are more of the people that built this infrastructure. And this is just one example of thousands of millions. And as always, Black Lives Matter. And the next slide are historical figures. Again, this is a Black woman from Guatemala. This is Jean Robotham, the first female Costa Rican Olympic athlete. Gabino Esaia, the greatest payador, Argentine payador. The next slide are other historical figures, but figures and images that shape how I guide my life. At the top left is Sara Sotillo. She's actually on the 5 cent Panamanian coin. And I'm looking at the coin and then I don't know, because this is just what I do. I like researching just in my free time. And I was researching her and I see this picture. I'm like, she looked Black to me. And then I read her bio and it said she was from San Miguel in Panama. I was like, oh, she Black. And so that's something that you would, like, Panamanian mainstream history would never tell you. She is the founder of the National Feminist Organization in Panama. In very little sources will you ever see that she's Afro-Panamanian. The bottom left are two women that, this photo just makes me happy. It's an actress from 3%, and Zizi Mota, and they both act in that series. In the middle is the Congos of Panama, which we have the festival every 2 years. That's in Portobelo, Panama, on the Caribbean coast in Colón province. And at the top right, I have that little picture there because if you look, there's a colored in person with a hat. It's a Black person. And that's usually what I zero into. Like everywhere I go, everything I see, everything I engage with, I'm looking for the Black folks. Like people make fun of me. They're like, how did you see that? I'm like, look, I'm just attuned to it. That's just who I am. And at the top, the bottom right is the Cristo Negro, or the Black Christ. That has just always been an imminent presence within my my childhood, my adulthood. And I just felt it right to put it there because Portobelo, or Portobelo in Colón province, is an inspiration for me and for many other people in general. That is also an area of maroons, of cimarrons, of self-emancipated Africans. And so in the next slide, and how am I doing for time? I feel like I'm talking a lot, like, please let me know. But in the next slide are some of my friends actually, and some of the people that I interviewed for my docuseries Negro. And I traveled throughout Latin America, just speaking to Black folks, Afro-descended folks, about their lived experiences, their identity, the racial hierarchy, the pigmentocracy, and just their sometimes it's not even a journey, because I was gonna say their journey into their identity or coming into yourself. You do have that, and then you have people who kind of came out of the womb with a certain type of consciousness, like for example, my mother. And I always say my mother was my first teacher. My mother was my first hero, and she continues to be, because she was the first to advocate and assert for our agency. And Dominique Day spoke about agency. We had a voice with her, and we continue to have a voice with her. She supports us. And when I say us, myself, my brother, and my sister, in whatever it is. I remember when I decided to embark on my docuseries, I was working at a mainstream news organization, and I was like, I'm about to quit. This is not for me. Y'all are too racist. And I remember I went to tell my parents, and my mother was like, quit, 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 yes, quit. And my dad was like, wait, hold on, let's think about this. And my mother just started marching around the kitchen saying, quit, quit, you're not happy, quit. And so that's how she raised us. And so in the last two slides, here are some of some more people who inspire me. In the middle picture at the top is Rayo Caña Negra, my really good friends, Evelyn Alvarez and Genevieve Comrie Williams. And we do workshops. We have a podcast centered around Black Central American, specifically, but Black people lived experiences in the Americas. And we speak from our experiences. We speak from our stories we've heard, observations. To the left are just materials that inspire me. Again, Rotundamente Negra, Miss Shirley Campbell, the three women at the bottom, Cielka, Stephanie, and Karen. They are in the network of Afro-Panamanians. And I'm in that. I'm about to get kicked out because I'm about to not be a joven or a young anymore, but they're doing amazing work in Panama. Machito and his Afro-Cubans and Peru Negro. And Machito and his Afro-Cubans, there was a quote from Mario Bausa where he said he hates people calling his music Latin jazz. He's like, we are not Latin. I don't know what Latin is. He said, my music is called Afro-Cuban jazz. It's from Africa. I'm an Afro-descendant, so get it right. Angelique Crawford in the top right, and she has a series out now, Naming Ourselves in Love and in Liberation. She's my Costa Rican, very dear friend. And on the bottom left is Javier Wallace, my partner that we do Afro Latino travel, where we did trips and tours to Latin America centered on Black history and contemporary life. Now we are doing it virtual. We're doing virtual classes and virtual experiences. So check that out. In the middle is actually some of my closest friends at the two extreme ends. They're my really good friends. In the middle, I guess that's my best friend because that's my husband. And this is some of the things that or one of my best friends, because I had a best friend before him. But this is some of the things that we show folks when they come to visit Cuba. And at the top, or rather the bottom right, those are some other members of the network of young Afro-Panamanians. And in this last slide, as I said, my mother was my first hero, my first teacher. On the left is my cousin with a Black doll. My mother was extremely adamant about Black dolls. There she is, she's combing my cousin's hair, which is a ritual for us as Black folks. But I remember my cousin came to visit us in the States when she was little. And my aunt called my mother after my cousin went back to Panama. And she's like, where's all of Kanisha's dolls? And my mother was like, I threw them away. She's like, those dolls did not look like her. But she sent her back with Black dolls. And so with that, with my mother instilling that in me, I was able to do the first Black doll festival in Cuba in 2018 and also 2019. I collaborated with the El Club Espendru, and that was an amazing thing to see. We collected Black dolls, we had an exhibition, activities, and all of that. And so actually I lied, there's one more slide. And I just have to plug in the work that I do at Radio Caña Negra, or Radio Black Sugar, because we are not brown, because it's a play on that. And this is our next workshop is next weekend, March 26th and 27th. I think there's maybe like 3 tickets left, but the one after that is in May. And we do a 2-day workshop around deconstructing anti-Blackness in the Latin American community and ways to heal and to move forward and to forge transformative, restorative, just futures that we can all participate in, and futures that are sustainable. And as Dominique Day and Dr. Moreno said about freedom, the freedom to, on the other side of that deconstruction, on that dismantling and that healing is freedom. And in freedom, I bring it back to Poder Negro, because that's what drives me every single day. Thank you.
Thank you, Dash. Thank you, Dr. Moreno Vega. Thank you, Dominique Day, for these wonderful introductions. I am going to pass it over now to my colleague, Josh, to continue the conversation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for passing it on to me, Daniel. And thank you so much, Dominique, Dash, and Marta, for your initial reflections. It was interesting to hear your remarks because the resonances between your work and life paths have already started to reveal themselves to an extent, right? And I think that people in the chat have started even resonating with them themselves, right? So it's just really beautiful to see how everyone's finding a little bit of themselves in your personal roots and routes to freedom. So for this portion, what I'm going to do is offer some short commentary regarding where I've seen these intersections, as well as several questions to frame the upcoming discussion between you all. And then after these offerings, you will have 20 minutes to engage in dialogue amongst yourselves. I'll be here, to add additional questions from the folks in the Q&A, which is a good moment to remind everyone to send in your questions. We already have a few, but please feel free to send in questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And then we'll compile and consolidate them throughout the second round of commentary. So Dominique, Marta, and Dash, we brought you all together here today for a variety of reasons, some of which have already been highlighted within your introductions. Though working across sectors in different ways, you each demonstrate a commitment to both transnational and local struggles for Black liberation. While many organizations and institutions in the United States attempt to solve the world's problems, you all approach your work as an opportunity for intercultural dialogue and exchange, acts of coalition building that are fundamental to Black freedom. Dominique, your work with the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent and the Daylight Collective is unique in that you explicitly engage local, national, and international Black communities on a regular basis. And to this end, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to us about how the global orientation of your work has impacted the articulation of and practices behind your work in a local context. So transitioning from policy into spaces of cultural memory, Marta, both your work with Corredor Afro and the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute offer us multimodal strategies for archiving Black life in the Americas, both past and present. And I would also add future. What do you believe the role of academic institutions is, if any, in supporting community-based archival work? And you kind of already hinted at that, but I would like for you to elaborate a little bit more on maybe the specifics, right, of kind of where you see the academic space or other formal institutions intervening, or not even intervening, I feel like that's an invasive word, but collaborating, supporting the type of work that you've been doing. And then connecting this cultural memory to other practices of creating a more well-informed Black international dash, your work on Afro-Latinx travel and anti-Blackness in the Latin community are reminders of how much work still needs to be done for folks across the diaspora to know one another. So to that end, what are your hopes for Black travel and what opportunities, of course, post-pandemic, but also the work that you've been doing, and what opportunities do you believe digital space, particularly during this time, have opened up for transnational conversations amongst Black folk? So now I'm going to pass it over to you all to just have a conversation for about 15 to 20 minutes based on these provocations. In whatever way feels right, there's no need to have any particular order. And then we'll launch into the Q&A questions. Just a reminder, if y'all want to submit questions, the button is at the bottom of the screen. And I'll be here if anyone needs it.
Thank you, Joshua. I think that's it's a really great sort of sandwich to bite into, right? That's sort of a lot, and it's exciting, it's interesting. Since I'm already talking, maybe I'll just start. I feel like there's, for me, as I started, I'm American, I grew up here in the US, as I started to pivot and look globally at Black diaspora, look globally at justice, human rights, these issues, I started to see more and more similarities, right? So our local communities are so unique and individual in the way that they experience joy and life and collective and priority, all of these sort of values. And at the same time, there's a lot of commonality in the way that white supremacy was exported. I always tell people, if you look at the British Airways flight map, it looks a lot like the map of the trade and trafficking in bodies like ours historically. And that's because the relationships and the networks that were created during colonialism, during the trade and trafficking in enslaved Africans, actually persist until today, right? And these networks, these relationships are relationships of tremendous economic value that obviously create a persistent economic disparity that continues to exploit and use often our bodies to create profit, our resources to create profit for global North entities, right? And for white entities. And so it's interesting to sort of see how common that experience is, but then even how common it is within a family. The best thing I think we do is country visits, and COVID has really put a limit on that. So while we have had more conversations like this, which is great, what we haven't been able to do is the only thing that I think is super valuable, which is really talking to people and listening to what they're saying and finding a way to push those truths, push our truths into the dominant public narrative. And so I'm hopeful that'll start again. But the commonalities of those truths, of our truths, are shocking, right? When we went to Belgium, which considers itself to be a leader in human rights, despite all things Congo, we found that Black kids were systematically pushed away from university-bound education. So the individual power, the small power of teachers based on their subjective opinions about whether a child had the potential to succeed in university was consistently being used to determine that Black kids should be diverted to vocational or technical education, that Black kids shouldn't be university bound. And the few Black kids who made it through found that they were not only alone, but they were unwelcome in the universities. The parents who fought this, parents, some of whom had PhDs from outside of Belgium, were threatened with police, threatened with child welfare, right? So we heard the story in Belgium, we heard another version of the story in Peru, right? These are two very different countries in every context you can think of. And yet this systematic denial or diversion from the opportunities that we would think to be the most clear, right? Parents who want more for their kids, the first thing they say is, let's get this child an education. And that will create a level playing field. A lot of us who are overeducated know that there's not a level playing field on the other side of a degree. But more importantly, this idea that these systems are operating automatically and without pause to divert us from a space where we can even have those conversations, and that's happening at every opportunity in the developmental framework, I don't know how you want to say it, the developmental hierarchy, is something that only became apparent to me as I started going country to country and hearing stories from Black folk that they assumed were very local, but in fact were part of what needs to be a transnational conversation. So I don't know if others maybe want to talk. That's sort of what I would say about that. I do appreciate, I have to say, like, it's been kind of an amazing conversation to be in. So I really appreciate, Dash and Marta, like what you're bringing to this and what you're bringing to me.
I think that, I mean, basically we're one person. You put Dominique, Dash, and I together, we're one person. And we're saying the same thing from a maybe different generational lens as well as professional lens, right? But we're the same person, because that's why it's important to work local and international, because as soon as you do that, you understand that white supremacy is global, right? And the attacks on our people are global. And at the same time, you admire our people for being resilient and kick-ass. I mean, because we're here because we're kick-ass, not because we were supposed to be here. I always go to a statement Howard Dodson, then chief of the Schomburg Library, said we weren't supposed to survive. The intention was not for us to survive. And if we work from that headset, right, we understand that what we have done is monumental in terms of survival, just survival. But then we have to go a step further and understand that we have to develop a different narrative. Because the narrative that has been developed through a educational process, right, has separated us in ways that we have to dismantle. Some of us say we're African American, others say we're Afro-Boricua, we're Afro this or we're Afro that. And the educational process, because of the process of making us invisible, right, has made us not see each other in each other. And that's the first step that we have to internally address, right, in how we speak. Because right now, the attempt to stop us from voting is all of us, right? But it's seen as an African American reality. No, it's a reality for all of us, because at least in the United States, we're no longer the minority. January 6th was a reaction to our superiority and the numerical majority that we are in this nation. And if we don't understand that, we don't understand anything. We are the numerical majority, and we have to act like that and understand that we are that. That Afro-Latinos, Afro-Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Panamanians, African-American, US-born, we're one. And we have lived similar experiences. And in 2021, that the vote would be in question in this nation tells you and puts the question, what is a democracy? And what have we been living under? So that if we don't start developing a narrative of truth, an education of truth, we keep inventing myth. We live in a mythology. And that's what our children inherit, right? So the work that Dash is doing, that Dominique is doing, is destroying that myth. And the universities have to destroy that myth because they've been complicit in the process of creating myth. Africana studies didn't develop because everybody said, oh, wow, we're missing this whole chunk of people. We sat on the floors, and I'm older, so that I know that we sat on the floors of the Department of Higher Education in order to make sure that there were departments of Africana studies, right? And now there are PhD programs. But because they have a name, it doesn't mean that the content of that education is the education that you should get. And no one is monitoring that and looking critically at what you're being exposed to, right? Because this is the norm, as Dash said. This is not a conversation in isolation. You have to decide if this is the conversation you get daily in your educational process. And if it's not, then it's wanting. Then it's wanting, right? And we know that what you described, Dominique, in Belgium is the reality for children in Harlem, in Bed-Stuy, in El Barrio, in Puerto Rico. Right now, we build this project, a Corredor Afro. There's not a school in that community, 2021. Not a school in that community. How is that all right? Right? And this is not an exception. Puerto Rico is not an exception. We see that throughout the African diaspora. So that we have to understand that our treatment is the same one. And we also have to focus on the local, right? Because for African Americans, Afro-Latinos are invaders, right? There are more Africans in Latin America than there is in the US numerically. I mean, if you want to take it to that, and Dash's film, The Man They Were Speaking, addressed it. There's about 250 million of us there, right? Because you have not only the descendants of Africans, but with mixed communities and so on and so forth, right? The predominant number is of color, right? And we're treated the same way as the numerical number here in the United States, which it was around 500,000 Africans that were brought to the United States forcibly. All of us are going through the same experience. So where is that discussed? Where is that discussed in your education? Right? So that unless we are critical in terms of what we have to learn and how we address ourselves and how we understand ourselves and what the narrative is, destroying myth that has been developed, though, the Latino power. I don't call myself Latino, I'm African descendant. We went to South Africa in 2011 for the UN conference, right? Against racism, xenophobia, and so on. And what happened at that conference? The US walked out. The US walked out of a racism conference because it refused to deal with the fact that a group of us had gotten there to address racism in the United States, but they were concerned with the conference was being racist against Israel.
This is 2001. 2001.
2001. I'm sorry.
We're 20 years out. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So that what we're looking at, right, is even our own country, right, walked out on us, wouldn't meet with us when we were in Durban. So that if we don't speak about all of those layers, right, and you all are supposed to be grown up because you're PhD students, right? If you're not talking about that, and that line and that thread that continues, then what good are you? Of what relevance are you? Right? Because book knowledge is just not enough. It gives you a job. And I favor jobs because I like all of those things too. You know what I'm saying? But if that's all it is about, a job, a tenured job in a university, right? What good are you? What relevance do you have to what we need to go through as a people? So I'll leave it there.
That's something that we ask when we do our Black Latin American history class. We ask people, or rather it's a statement. You learned, it's a three-day workshop, and I always end with, you have this knowledge, what are you gonna do with it? Because it's cute and cool to tweet about it, and Instagram and TikTok, that's great because social media disseminates information and all that is cool. How are you showing up in those situations where there's a candidate for a job or you're in line and someone's getting discriminated? Various examples of these microaggressions, which the micro is the macro. How are you going to step up? How are you going to show up? How are you going to navigate those spaces differently now that you know more or better? I remember and so my ties to the academy is kind of like non-existent. Like, I got my bachelor's at Temple, TU. But that was pretty much the end of like my actual participation in the academy. And that has actually been kind of a little bit of I don't want to say hindrance because I always find a way, but that has been an obstacle in some of my research pursuits. I have, like I mentioned, my friend Javier, he's actually finishing his PhD. So when I want to get articles, he's like, let me know whatever article you need, I'll get it for you. And all of my other friends who are in the academy, for those articles that I don't have access to because I'm not in the academy, because I don't have an EDU email. And this is what we're talking about with Dr. Moreno saying that access, you know, what good is the academy if, you know, and I'm at a privileged position and I understand that. I have a lot of access, a lot of privilege, and I still can't get a damn article. So what of the people that everyone, or rather the academy has extracted that information from? What of them? And I remember when I went to Peru and I actually brought, it was a book, And I can't remember his name, and I'm really mad at myself. I think it was Larry, maybe. And I got the book from the Caribbean Culture Center. And it was the pictures that he took of people in Peru. And it was of the Bayimbrosio family. And I went to visit them, and there's a picture of the boys when they were babies. And I brought it, and I was like, look. And they were like, oh my God, I remember that, da, 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 da. And so that was the first time they were seeing it. And it was really cool to connect with the family in that way, because it's the twin boys, and now they're in their 30s, I believe. But they were able to see the material that they engaged with. Another example of that is when I went to Pearl Lagoon in Nicaragua, and I was there because a really good friend of mine, Pablo, invited me because he was teaching during the summer, and we were just sitting and chatting with a member of the community, Kizzy, I remember her name. And one of the students, she was kind of halfway interviewing her. And so as Kizzy was talking, the student was like, do you have any primary sources on that? And I was like, you are speaking to her. She's the primary source. You know, I had to stop her because I was like, wait, what am I hearing right now? So you're asking her to pull, I guess, maybe books or articles or whatever the case is on her lived experience. We're not going to do that today. And so I had to have a little talk with her about it later on, and she understood. And so, you know, and she was really remorseful. And, you know, that's what we mean when we're talking about the white dominant culture, the white pathology that we're steeped in, that sometimes you don't even realize what's going on and what kind of harm you're perpetuating. And this is something that, this is a little inside thing with my husband. Like at times when I'm being really selfish or just acting out of pocket, he calls me Blanquita, or he calls me white, because to him, and this is really from his experience, he's taken certain behaviors as how white Cubans behave. He's taken certain class behaviors as this is how white people act, and I don't like it. And you know, he pulled me by my wig sometimes, and he's like, you need to check yourself. You know, we are in community here. Figure out what you're gonna do. And so as we're doing the research, as we're producing material, it's also dismantling those that pathology within ourselves. And it's, you know, and again, I got dragged earlier before the conference when I made a joke about Queen Mother, and Dr. Moreno said, well, we don't like monarchies here. I'm like, yep, drag me. Yep, you're right. You know, and it's in love, you know, this is because we want to do better, because we imagine more for ourselves. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm thankful for that, for always being in community with other Black folks, because this is what it is. You know, we weren't meant to survive. We weren't meant to be here, and we still here. And so I think it's beautiful, it's valuable when we host clients to, and again, we're not doing any trips this year because we're just not, that's not what we're doing. We're not traveling this year. Everything is virtual with Afro-Latinx travel at this point. But when we were traveling, it was amazing to see people's faces. People from the US, we had people, African-Americans, we had Dominicans and Puerto Rican, people from all over that we would bring to Cuba, to Panama, to Peru. And it was amazing how, like Dr. Moreno said, about how they saw one another. How, you know, when my partner was talking about being an Abakwa, which is an all-male mutual aid secret society, they were talking about being alpha. They were talking about their different lived experiences. It's amazing to see that. And again, as I mentioned, the Black Doll Festival, we usually ask clients to bring Black dolls with them on their trips, because it's challenging to find Black dolls, and for example, even in Panama. And the look on those kids' faces when they see a doll, and you know, the kids are so cute, they look like dolls themselves, and they look at the dolls and they freak out. They're like, wow. And they stay staring at that doll because they see themselves in that doll. They see a face that looks like them. And I remember one particular time we were passing out dolls in the community in El Cerro, where my husband's from. And in the line were women who were like 70 and 80 years old. And I'm like, Madrina, like, so we have to give the dolls to the kids first. And so they were like, look, I never had a Black doll. Can you maybe, save one for me? And I'm like, of course. And I remember one of the godmothers on the block, every time we passed her house, because she took the doll and she put it for her Yemaya, every time we walked past, she would point to the doll because she keeps her door open. She'd be like, hey, and she would point to the doll. And so that's what fills me up. Just things like that. You got a Black doll. That's Black regularness and Black excellence to me. And that, again, is in that Black normativity that has always been my reality.
But the beauty of that también is, right, you see it, people see it as a doll, but for her, it was an homage to an African divinity, right? And the fact that these African divinities, goddesses of nature, gods of nature, survive, right? They survive in Cuba, they survive in Brazil, they survive in Colombia, they survive in Panama, they survive in New York City. How phenomenal is that? And to look through a lens of spirituality, right? Of respect for ancestors, respect for nature, respect for character and ethics, right? We have that. We have that framework. And our people continue to use that framework in how they live their daily lives.
Yeah, and let me add to that too, just also in defining and leaning into struggle, right? Right before this, I was reading a quote from Raphael Warnock, who's this Black American. He's the new senator elected in Georgia after this massive post. And I think I actually have the quote here. He says, I think he's talking about people voting, right? He's like, I think that vote is a kind of prayer for the world that we want our children to live in. And our prayers are stronger when we pray together. And this space where, irrespective of sort of which religion, which spirituality, what the tradition is, how consistently, right, we really define our spirituality as also another tool, another mechanism to understand and to perpetuate struggle and to perpetuate this sort of reimagining and renegotiating of what it is for us to be free and to feel joy and to be in a collective and in community with joy. I really like what Dash was saying about this, the ways that we're in community, including the ways we drag each other as a sign of being in community. But that space to me is so beautiful, so Black, so real, and so it just fills my heart. So I really, really appreciate what you both just had to say.
Yeah, this is all very beautiful, and I have a ton of things I would like to say personally, but we have some questions here, so I want to put those in the space and then let y'all continue talking. So Shanti has 3 different questions that are all targeted towards y'all, kind of like what I did in the beginning, so I'm going to say those. And then this last question I'm actually going to save and combine with my closing question later. So Shanti's question for Dr. Moreno Vega is, in what ways have white supremacist universities warped or obscured our collective knowledge of Blackness in Puerto Rico? Shanti's question for Dominique Day is, what are the limits and possibilities of seeking freedom for Black people using the framework of human rights and humanism more broadly? And then their question for Dash is, I loved your documentary Negro. What drove you to make the documentary, and can you tell us more about other documentary work that you worked on?
Well, I think that the example that Dominique gave for Belgium and children is the reality for the school system here, from elementary school to the university setting. People who are looking at these traditions historically have been marginalized. So if you're a scholar looking at Black traditions, you were marginalized. And the fact remains that now, because of Black Lives Matter and other situations that are happening within the young community here, insisting upon Africana studies being part of the curriculum, and also because of outside funding, because you're seeing foundations supporting the creation of Black projects throughout the Caribbean, including Puerto Rico. You're beginning to see focuses on developing projects that have to do with Africana studies. And that's the case for the University of Puerto Rico, where they're developing a minor for Africana studies. But one of the things that, again, one has to be very mindful of is that you're developing these programs within a structure that has been structured around white supremacy. And just because it says it's Africana studies, is the support going to be there for the professors who want to be, and I hate that word radical because it's not radical to look at our experience, right? But have the courage to combat their superiors who tend to be white, right? Or visibly white, and have a Eurocentric way of seeing education. It's still, who frames these discussions, who frames the curriculum, who frames the study, and who provides the resources for the study that is not there, right? For the information that is not there, the investigations that have to be created and done. Maricruz has been doing a event, I think it is for the past 10 years, in her institution that honors the Black militia that fought back the British from taking over the island, right? But this is something that generally is not taught within the school system. This is something that an African descended woman has decided to put at the center of celebrating, African soldiers who fought, right? If we look at the globe, how much research has been done on that? How much research has been done in the different islands? Almost nothing, right? Throughout Latin America, almost nothing, because the quelling of this information, also resources to do this investigation, has generally happened because people have chosen to do it on their own dime. And that's real. I mean, if you look at Dash's work, if you look at our work, it has been basically done because we're committed to do it. I'm the mother of 2 sons. And when I was, coming up with them, they're men now, but, I was like, they got to see gods that look like them. They got to be Black like them. You don't understand that you're sacred unless you see the sacred that looks like you. It's like Dash said about the doll, right? If you see that doll, she looks like you, you say, ooh, there's a doll that looks like me, right? And if you see a god or a goddess that looks like you, you know that you're sacred, right? And I think that that's the power of, Dominique, that you were talking about, that spirituality has remained within us. You can say it's the Yoruba tradition or the Abakwa tradition, the Congo tradition. All of these traditions exist in some way within our communities. But that spirituality, that belief in character and ethics, right? That has been central. That has been the backbone of our communities. And the Blackness that you define as, that's our Blackness. Yes, it's our Blackness because there is an ethic. There is character, iwapele, right? Within the Yoruba tradition, that your character is everything, right? And our people continue to sustain that. So that, as we look at what is being developed, we have to see if those elements are there. If those elements are there. If those elements aren't there, then it's painting Black a European structure for education. So what you're developing is young people that look Black, but their mind is not.
That's actually a great segue for me, because I think exactly this space, and right, we know like Fanon talks about this, right? What it is to be the colonized mind and to go to be exceptional in these spaces. And I'll also give a shout out to Black regularness right now, but to ultimately learn that not only have you not found community or anything real in these, even in your tremendous success in the white spaces, you've actually been, I think he says, deprived of your local cultural originality. You've literally been educated into believing your own family are primitive and backward and less than, and the culture that should give you survival and resilience, you've been taught to scorn it, right? It's a betrayal that is so incredibly deep. Probably you spent a lifetime getting over that. And I think that actually informs the question that was asked to me as well about what is the role of human rights? And I'll tell you, right, I'm a lawyer. I will use the tools I can use, but it's important that we see them as tools. And it's really funny. I spent a lot of time in human rights forums, and a thing people like to say is human rights are for everybody. And it didn't take me very long to start understanding that human rights are for everybody is deployed very similarly to another phrase I used to hear a lot, which was all lives matter. Right? And then some level, these spaces where we insert equality as a response to someone's articulation of a particular and racialized injustice, right? That is a space of saying my comfort needs to be reestablished here. My equilibrium needs to be reestablished here. So yeah, human rights are for everybody. And yet our human rights framework has still allowed a very familiar post-colonial dynamic to persist and thrive, right? Even in the moments where it has opportunities to do so much more. And that space of, what does the human rights framework give to us? Yes, use the framework. Yes, use the tool. Yes, throw human rights violations at the people who are calling themselves defenders of it. But certainly a human rights framework is never going to lead us to liberation. That is going to be people, that is going to be practices that are grounded in community, resilience, struggle, right? That is going to, the imagination of what it looks like to take steps towards liberation isn't going to come in a consensus policy document negotiated in the UN or any other bureaucracy, right? Because at the end of the day, and I think a lot of us who work on justice understand this. Let me just say this. I think a lot of us who are Black in white spaces understand this. Perhaps the biggest danger to our momentum is that the disruption of white comfort often is something that cannot be surmounted. The disinclination of people to sit with discomfort, the disinclination of people in power to sit with the discomfort of racism, of white privilege, of their complicity in that, of the benefits they receive from that. I have found that to be an incredibly powerful motivator for people to abandon their values in favor of reestablishing comfort. And that's not a conversation people like to have. But that is the reason why we can't rely on a human rights framework to create the racial equity we want to see. Because at the end of the day, comfort and the comfort of privilege has been an incredibly powerful motivator. And, our work to build our capacity, to build our power, to build our agency has always had to navigate that as an unspoken but incredibly pervasive obstacle.
Woo, you said a word, which reminds me of something that my colleague and friend, Jambiyev says, white terrorism is a dangerous practice because we got a lot of those tears in our workshops. And at this point, we've heard it all. And Evelyn, our co-facilitator and my friend, she says that she brings up that there is definite grief in now understanding that you have been fed lies and that a lot of your identity and beliefs are hinged on lies. And so there is a grieving period. And we usually say, or rather, I'm going to speak for myself. I usually say, write it in your diary, take it to your altar, take it to your therapist, but don't tap me on my shoulder because we have our own tears that we've been shedding for 5 centuries and beyond. So you have to figure that out. And so what you said about sitting with discomfort, we often say that in our workshops, sit with the discomfort, don't look away. locate where those feelings are coming from and what messages it's telling you. And again, that's your work to do. Because people will say, how do I don't know. I don't know. I give your problem back to you. How would you navigate this? And the all lives mattering, I'll say something like, oh, Black women are bombed. Then here comes somebody, raggedy uncle, saying all women. And I'm like, I said Black, sir. I said Black. And I was just tweeting about standing firm in what I know to be true. You're not gonna gaslight me. I said what I said. And so I think that's the part, because people will often say that it takes a lot of courage to do this work. And I do agree. And at the same time, I don't want to disappoint my mom. I don't want to disappoint my sister. And that's what matters to me. Like, it's great if people like my work and, great, But I was really like, Mommy, you saw it? You watched it? Like, Abuelita, did you see the video I sent you? And so to the question that someone asked, I did Negro when I was in my 20s. And the first place that I did a video was in Brazil. And I went there for Carnival. And I just happened to have my little camera because I was working in news at the time. I had my degree in broadcast journalism. And, till this day, I always, well, not really, because we have the cameras on the phones, but that turned into the series. And I'm actually going to do an update to that series this year, 10 years later, because there are certain things in the series that, and I've said this often, my views didn't shift. I think I found more strength to stand in integrity in my beliefs, because there are certain things in there that I'm like, ooh, girl, why'd you say that? And so, in this whole process of unlearning, of healing, of building new frameworks and reimagining, I find that now I definitely have the courage of my convictions. I can stand in what I say and mean what I say, and good character, iwapele. I know what that means in practical terms. I've seen things, I've heard things, I've been in community with people, and I can discern what's the most important thing for me. And the most important thing for me is not white approval. Actually, if white people approve, I did something wrong. I did something wrong if white people like this. Let me go see something. Let me go check, and I'm joking. But what the biggest thing for me is what my community feels about it. And I have a joke with my husband, like I'll like take a book that's about Afro-Cuban whatever, right? Afro-Cuban religion, Afro-Cuban spirituality, whatever. And I'll read it to him and like quiz him, and he'll say something and I'm like, ooh, that's not what the book says. That's so terrible. You don't even know your own spirituality. And so it's a joke between us, because obviously he lives these experiences and he would know best. But that is the framework that I'm coming from. Who knows best than the people who live it? And so with the series, that's what I wanted. I wanted folks to speak for themselves. I started it because the conversations that I was having, my normal wasn't the mainstream, and that wasn't my goal to make it into mainstream. It was just to offer the narratives and the experiences of Black folks, of people that my family, my friends, people I didn't know, people who are extended family, etc. And it was really for my sister, because she was tired of explaining these really preschool questions of, you're Black and speak Spanish. She was tired of it, and she's 6 years younger than me. So by that time, I was like, look, now you can just send this link to the people asking you, because again, it's like chiseling that path so that people after us don't have the same challenges or the same difficulties. That, when you free yourself, your responsibility is to free others.
Those responses were all very beautiful. Thank you so much. For those reflections. So now I'm going to offer, I guess, the final two questions. I'm going to combine them into one. So the question that I had come up with was, and I feel like Dr. Moreno Vega has already sort of answered this, but I would love to hear it from Dash and Dominique as well. But what is the role of Black studies in the ongoing project of Black liberation? And then to get into Shayna's question, to add my own little addendum, when Black studies isn't enough, how can we work or pursue education outside of the academy, right? And what does that look like in the communities that we live in, especially in the midst of multiple pandemics? And I'll let y'all interpret what the multiple pandemics are, but I feel like we all kind of have an idea of, you know, beyond the public health crisis, what else is going on. So, and if we could all keep our, I guess, responses to like 3 minutes, since we're running a little low on time, and I do want Bonnie to give her lovely closing remarks to praise you all for the beautiful work that's been done here.
Well, I'll be very pointed. You have to go into it knowing that Africana studies is not enough. You shouldn't even be asking the question, you know it's not enough. And the fact that it's not enough guides you in terms of what is it that you need to continue to do, right? And explore, because what needs to happen is that everybody needs to understand that whatever you're getting in academia is just not enough. It may be the beginning of your understanding, but it's certainly not enough. So I'll pass it on.
Okay. You know, I often tell students that the thing that you see, and it gives you like a little bit of a stomach ache, but you can't really say what bothers you. You know, you don't feel so good about it. You know, you maybe don't feel so great about, you know, being the only Black person in a group of white people seeing this film. It's not overt, or maybe it wasn't the intention from what you understand, but you get a little stomachache about it. That's the space to lean in, right? That's the space to think and to start talking and to understand and help develop the discourse of what the problem looks like. And that's the space I think that's really open for research, for academic work, for to really be investigated, problematized, explained by those who really situate their activism within the academy, which I think, you know, that is an option. I don't want to delegitimize anyone's choice, because I think that would have been a hard choice for me to make. But for somebody who can look at their struggle as really pushing the academy, and feel like they can get up every day and do that, I think there is a space to really bring those conversations where we see something, we hear something, somebody says something that sounds a little condescending to us, or that is a facile and reductionist articulation of our experience or of race or of racism. And the idea that you could take that kind of like little clutch in your stomach and start talking to each other about what does that look like in terms of how we blow people's minds by pushing their understanding. I think that exists in the academy. I think it exists outside the academy. I don't think anything is enough. I think there is struggle in all the spaces. I think pick the one that you can get up every day and go to and be in that one. But I also think understand what these taxonomies have cost us. And I think that's a little bit of what both Dash and Dr. Moreno are telling us. Understand that the classifications of these departments, of these fields, have actually also furthered the fragmentation of our identities, right? We talk about sort of intersectionality and what it is to bring back together our understandings that Black is not separate from woman, is not separate from queer, is not separate, but ultimately we need to look at people in the fullness and the complexity of who we are to understand that those are sort of important realities that keep from you know, fragmenting race, fragmenting the coalitional nature of race and its power to be transformative. And so I think maybe I'm over my 3 minutes, but I guess to me, I think there's a space to keep diving into that discomfort, those moments where we have a little stomach ache or we're not quite sure what to say, but we know it's not okay. Because I think those are some of the most interesting spaces to build out social science research, to build out theoretical understandings, and to build out activism. And holding that goal, as opposed to being defined by the institutions where we sit, I think is worthwhile. That's how I see it.
That nagging feeling, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I've had ongoing moments of those nagging feelings that have led my research, like certain things that I have heard, and I'm like, it's not adding up. That's not adding up for me. That something's missing here. And I think that's especially important, to lean into what you know or what you feel to be true. And I love that. And Doctora Moreno has said, I've heard you say this before about don't you ever stop seeing yourself in someone. I remember it was your mother. It was a situation with your mother. You got in trouble with mommy. And I remember the first time it was on TV. I think it was HBO, one of those specials. And I didn't watch anybody's part except yours. I was like, not interested. So Dr. Moreno. And so the part where your mom really drove it home, don't you ever stop seeing yourself in other people. I was like, oof. And I sat there with that and I'm like, damn. And that really guides a lot of what I do. The academy to me is what it is. It's extractive. It's in many ways exploitative. It is a resource, it definitely is. And at the same time, to not ground your worth in that, that it's, like I said, it's another resource, absolutely. And I know people who give a lot of esteem to it. And I'm like, well, until you address the white pathological structural power, like I'll let y'all simmer over there, And so my biggest thing is with that nagging feeling. Like, for example, my favorite pastime is to roast Simón Bolívar, the great liberator. I take joy in roasting him because people see him as this symbol in history that's so great. And I'm like, well, his army was Black. He didn't liberate anything. Black folks liberated, if we're gonna go in that context, Black folks liberated Latin America. And so when people hear things like that, they're like, wait, hold on. What else have I been misled in? Because that's one of the biggest narratives within Latin America, that Simón Bolívar was this great man. And I'm like, just know that all of your faves are trash. And so again, this is a joke and I like exaggerating, but there's truth to it. I think there's value in interrogating things that we have been taught. My mother growing up, whenever we would say things like, oh, they say, eating strawberries is good for this. She's like, who is they? They? Where's they? Where's they? Hello, is they here? And so she always, I'm guided by that as well. And so I think it's just another resource, another way to continue interrogating.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for your time, your expertise, your just ability to come together so seamlessly. It really does feel like, as Dr. Moreno Vega said, y'all are one person, right, to an extent, right, with clearly different life paths and experiences, but all coming together in this space and in a lot of other ways. So hopefully the conversations will continue, but now I'm gonna pass it on to Bonnie to close us on out.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Josh, for that Passover. And hello, everyone. I am Bonnie, she, her pronouns, and I'll be delivering our closing remarks for today. Thank you again to our marvelous, marvelous panelists, Dr. Moreno Vega, Dominique, and Harris Machado, for sharing your time and thoughts and minds and just beautiful spirits with us. Because Black lives are lived within and beyond the Academy, we thought it would be important to have panelists who represent this. And this is what you've offered us. When I tell you, I'm glad that the camera function is off and that my mute was off, because I was clapping and hollering the whole time, because you've all given me things to think about and gifts. And some of those things include, Dominique, you reminded me of the importance of art to gather ourselves, our tools and individual and collective power to recognize and struggle against anti-Blackness and white supremacy operating everywhere and always. Dr. Marta Moreno Vega, you reminded me of the power of destroying myths. Africana Studies' role in this, and that we, no matter where we are and what degrees we hold, we are always becoming and have an obligation to redefine our lived realities. And finally, Dash, you reminded me of who we love and who we are accountable to. The beauty and importance of hashtag Black regularness, and that archives are created and lived every day at the barbershop, in our homes, in our travels, in the photos that we have the privilege to have of our ancestors and loved ones, and in our bodies. Thank you again so much for this gift. And thank you to everyone that was able to join us today, both from Penn and beyond. We apologize that we may not have gotten to all of your questions. However, just as lives are lived within and beyond this Zoom grid, so will this conversation. So to do so, we are asking to please follow and support our panelists in ways that they have already named and include the following. You may support Dr. Moreno Vega's work by purchasing her memoir, When the Spirits Dance Mambo, Growing Up New Yorican in El Barrio, from your local bookstore, and supporting and attending events hosted by the Caribbean Cultural Center, African Diaspora Institute in Harlem, Corredor Afro in Puerto Rico, and the Creative Justice Initiative. And you may find links in the chat as well to all of these places. You may support Dominique Day by supporting and attending webinars hosted by Daylight, and for folks at Penn, catching her as a visiting fellow at Perry World House. And finally, you may support Harris Machado by following her on Instagram at Diaspora Dash, and her work at Afro Latino Travel and at Radio Caña Nueva. Let me be clear, Radio _ Cana without the ñ _ negra, and you'll find that in the chat as well. You may listen to her podcast, Caña Negra, almost anywhere you listen to podcasts, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You may also watch her docuseries, Negro, a docuseries about Latinx identity. And finally, thank you so much to the Department of Africana Studies, specifically Sean, Ms. Carroll, Dr. Williams, Dr. Casamayor, Dr. Hanchard, and Dr. Beavers for supporting us in this process. Our ASL interpreters, Charity and Megan, our Spanish translators, Dustin and Maria, and the fantastic Africana Graduate Colloquium Committee for making this happen. If you would like to find more events hosted by Africana Studies Department and the Center of Africana Studies, the center will be hosting an event on Zoom actually next week on March 22nd at 5:30 titled Towards an Acoustomology of Afro-Cuban Rap with Pablo D. Herrera Veitia. Yeah, it sounds good, right? You may subscribe to Africana Studies mailing list, register to this event and others in the website that will be included in the chat. You may also find us on Instagram on @AfricanaUPenn and YouTube at UPenn Africana. We hope that you all have a wonderful day, and thank you so much again to all of our panelists and the folks that were able to join us. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you.